Hello, my name is Molly Hamilton and I'm with Lindenwood University's Writing Center. Today I'll be talking to you about what an essay is and some good ways to go about writing an essay. Now, while I'm aware that a lot of you probably already know what an essay is from high school or other college classes, this is just a quick overview to not only review it, but also give you an idea of what we're looking for in academic writing and in college writing. So let's go ahead and get started on our quick slideshow. Before we get started, it's important to note the three most basic parts of a paper, and really you can apply this to just about any paper. So, as you can see on the screen here, the three most basic parts are the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Now, the introduction is like the head of the paper. It has a pretty big job. It's setting up the reader to know what the paper is about and why it matters. So looking at the three subparts, the first one on the list is the hook. Now the hook is what we use to kind of lure the reader in and get their attention. We don't want a paper that presents itself as boring or something that you're forced to read. We want the reader to be intrigued, so they actually want to read it and keep reading. And that goes for your professor too. We want to go ahead and think about our audience when we're writing. So an example of a hook would be something like an interesting quote, or perhaps a little personal story that ties in with the paper itself, or maybe a fact. You could have a fact that might be kind of surprising or jarring to kind of make the reader go, "Oh, I didn't know that," and they want to keep reading to learn more about it. Now, before I talk about the background area of an introduction, I would like to explain the thesis. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because in order to understand the background's job, we need to have a good understanding of what the thesis statement does. So the thesis statement is that one sentence, or sometimes up to 4 sentences, that discuss what the paper is about so the reader knows what to expect and what we're signing up for. So the thesis statement is very critical, and that's why we kind of need to have a background to go before the thesis statement, because sometimes your thesis statement might be something very foreign to somebody, or maybe a little controversial, or perhaps something that's just a little hard to explain at first. But if you have your background beforehand, you're kind of setting the stage for the thesis statement so your reader is prepared to accept it and learn about it. So when you have a hook, a background, and a thesis statement all set up in your introduction, you're really setting your paper up for success. We've gotten the reader's attention with our hook. We're preparing the reader to know what they're going to be learning about and to be perhaps more open-minded or receptive to the thesis statement. And then we give the thesis statement so the reader knows exactly what to expect from the rest of the paper, which is also why it's critical in the body that we don't forget about our thesis statement, because we must continue to support it. The main points you have within the body paragraphs of your paper support the thesis. So within your main points, you need to make sure that you have enough details to help the reader understand how the point supports your thesis, and you want to make sure you have analysis and evidence. So with analysis, you're giving information, which would be your evidence, but you're just not going to drop a fact and run away. Instead, you're going to break it down so the reader can understand how the fact connects to your paper. It's easy to kind of get into the mode of thinking it's really obvious how the two might have a connection, but we have to remember the reader is not a mind reader. They need to have things explained in order for them to completely understand what you're saying. If you're doing more of an argumentative paper, you're going to have a counter argument. So if you have a one-sided argument, if somebody does not agree with you and they're reading the paper, they might be thinking like, "Oh, you just didn't consider option A, or you didn't think about option B," and then dismiss everything you're saying, which is not what we're hoping for when we're doing academic writing. So you want to find somebody who might have an opposing viewpoint or look at something from a different angle so you can further support what you're saying. Now, if you're writing an argumentative paper, you'll want to kind of challenge that opposing viewpoint or just kind of have a rebuttal to the counter. That way, you are defending what you're saying and showing the reader why you're taking the stance that you're taking. Or you could also offer a different alternative or a suggestion that might oppose the opposing viewpoint, just to show that you've considered a lot of options and you were thoughtful in your paper writing. Now, with the conclusion, usually we have a review of our thesis, just to kind of solidify to the reader what the main point is, what the big takeaway is, because we don't want them to get hung up or kind of forgetful about why they're reading the paper. And then usually we like to have a going forward, so the reader is invited to think about what they just read and think about how they could possibly apply it. Within the conclusion, though, it's important to remember that we don't bring up something that's a brand new point. We want to make sure that it's reviewing our main points, giving us something to think about, but not bringing up a brand new piece of evidence or a brand new source. That does not belong in a conclusion. That should be in a body paragraph. So now that we've discussed all the basic parts of a paper and kind of see how they work together, we want to start thinking about how to get started on a paper. Now, naturally, you want to get a topic that you find really interesting, that you're passionate about, because if you're bored while writing the paper, chances are your reader is going to be bored as well. Of course, I'm aware that usually in the university writing courses or any class where you're doing some writing, you are a little limited on what you can write about. However, if you find something to be very difficult to write, or if you're looking at your paper topics and thinking, I'm doing all this research, but none of this is anywhere close to relating to my major, you can talk to your professor about it. And usually, professors are open to modifying the assignment so A, you benefit more from it, and B, you do a better job writing it. When you're passionate about what you're writing, usually the writing is much better. And once you have your paper kind of set up in your mind, and you think, okay, this is what I'm going to be writing, I'm excited about, I can't wait to get started, it's important to start thinking about your thesis a little more critically. Of course, we know that a thesis states what the paper is about and what's going to happen, but you also want to think, I need to add the so what to my thesis. So the reader, when they see it, will think to themselves, oh, that's why it's important. Because if you just have a thesis that says something that seems a little straightforward or blunt, the reader might think, well, so why should I keep reading? But if you think about explaining why you're taking the stance or explaining why the information that you're researching is important, the reader will then say, oh, so this does benefit me. And then the reader will be much more open and intrigued when reading your paper. Now, when it's actually time to start writing the paper, some students like to sit down, jump right in, and just start typing. And they won't stop typing until they feel like they've reached their conclusion. That is one way of going about writing the paper. Another way to go about writing the paper is to first actually sit down and write up an outline, or thinking of what order you want to put your points in. Usually, I'll have students who come into the writing center and they have a really nice paper, nice paragraphs, but the order of things don't seem to build very well off of each other. Sometimes they'll have a point that seems like it relates really well to another point, but they're nowhere near each other, and then we find ourselves kind of reorganizing and rebuilding things. Sometimes that can take a little while. So, thinking about what order you want to put your thoughts into first can usually be very beneficial and time saving. And once you've written your paper and you kind of check out how your paragraphs link together, make sure you have those nice transitions in there so everything is nice and smooth, you want to look at the language that you're using. You might want to go through and read it out loud to see if you hear any favorite words, to make sure you don't accidentally overuse words like and or however or but. And you kind of want to go through and look for typos or grammatical errors. And of course, it's always a good idea to come see us at the Writing Center. We'll be happy to look at your paper as well and help you catch things that maybe you might have missed. Another big part of writing a paper is making sure that it is well supported. So we've talked about ways to kind of set it up and making sure that everything's flowing together and it sounds good, but you also have to think about the content of your paper. Sometimes at the Writing Center, I'll see where students will use their sources very heavily. They might do something like have a block quote after a block quote or lots of very long quotes, and they don't really break down the information or give us a lot of analysis. And after a while, I'll start thinking there's so many sources, it's like I'm reading somebody else's paper and not the student's paper, and their voice kind of gets lost and buried, and we don't want that. We want to use the sources to support what you're saying. Writing can be intimidating, but remember that you're a unique person and you have something to say, and it's worth listening to. You also want to look out for using phrases like I think or I believe because you're the writer, so if you're saying something, I'm going to assume that you think and believe those things. You also want to make sure that you have credible sources. You don't want to just take something from just anyone without looking into that person's background. You want to make sure that the source that you're using is credible and respected. Now, if you're having trouble finding a good source that you feel is credible or peer-reviewed, you can always see our reference librarians. They are very good at finding all sorts of information, no matter how obscure, and they're good at making sure that you know how to find a source that your teacher will approve of. Finally, to kind of wrap things up and to give you one last review, I like to show the essay house. This image kind of gives you a visual understanding of how a successful paper is usually set up. So to the left, we have a paper that is in crisis. It's boring, there's no preparation, the thesis statement is not being supported, it's kind of being supported by one paragraph and then it seems to have been forgotten about, and then the conclusion just has random points that pop up that are kind of related, but it's not really well planned. But on the right side, we have a paper that's much more structured, and you can tell a little bit more that this is a house. It has a nice hook to draw us in. It has background that sets us up for the thesis, and best of all, that thesis statement is being supported by all the body paragraphs. And then that conclusion is just solidifying everything together. Ideally, that is how we want our essays to be. Thank you all for listening today. I hope this slideshow was able to kind of give you a quick refresher and to help you out. And if you have any questions that I did not cover, or if there's something you would like to have some more details about, please feel free to reach out to us at the Writing Center. Thank you again for your time and happy writing. Here you can see our contact information.